You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Tropical depression Beta now over land in Texas, not too far inland by the way. Weakening now, 30 miles per hour, still could deliver significant amounts of rain because along the coast there you've still got a lot of energy for the storm to bring up that could deliver some significant rainfall. Elsewhere though, Hurricane Teddy is actually off the screen now on this particular graphic, but it's huge, I can tell you that much. We'll get a better view of it just in a moment. But Teddy is about to make landfall, or will make landfall tomorrow morning in Atlantic Canada. Now, I say about to make landfall, it sort of is. I know tomorrow in the grand scheme of things is quite far away, but Teddy is enormous, meaning that tropical storm force winds are already occurring on land in Nova Scotia. Let's just get a quick look at that on the National Hurricane Center's forecast cone. And you can see on the right hand side, that's Teddy's forecast, 90 miles per hour its current intensity. And the yellowish area, the orange-yellow kind of color, that's the tropical storm wind field. And it's very large indeed. I think my team were debating earlier whether it might be in the top 10 for hurricanes. I don't think we're fully sure yet, but let's introduce them now. My name's Nathan Foy. I'm joined by Isaac, Ryan, Strat, and Euxinada this evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Nice
Certainly a
to have you on board.
situation on our hands with Teddy here.
Yes.
So here is the last visible imagery there of Teddy. Dying off the daylight, that is. Storm, though, is still fighting on by the looks of things, with convection blowing up a little bit west of center by the looks of things.
Yeah, and Recon's passing through the center right now, or it was recently. It's going across the northern periphery now. I'm sure Isaac has more detailed Recon data. Flight level winds way down on the northeastern quadrant compared to earlier, although earlier today they were going much further out into the east than they did on their recent pass, so that could be part of the explanation for it. But still a pressure, the latest drop zone reading giving 953 millibars,
Wow.
which is, I think that's actually about 3 millibars lower than the pressure they went with at the update. No, that's actually 5 millibars lower. They were saying 958 millibars an hour ago. It looks like the storm's had its pressure begin to rise slower than they anticipated.
Now, Strat, looking up outside your place in Connecticut, that's pretty much the outer edge of the storm, isn't it?
My old home in Connecticut, yeah, up here in Massachusetts. We're under
you're
the
there now,
cloud
yes,
cover
that's
right now.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that cloud cover.
We haven't really gotten any rainfall here, but we've been under the cloud cover of Teddy for most of today. Gale force winds have been near the shore, but not really coming onshore. That graphic, usually indicates that storm conditions can occur, or storm force sustained winds can occur within it. So they have some coastal, wind advisories and flood advisories up for a good chunk of northern New England right now. And actually, just because of the wind gusts that this thing's been bringing on further inland, we do have a red flag warning, keep in mind for most of our state in Massachusetts and Rhode Island heading into tomorrow as well.
Now, as we look at the progression of the storm, you can see how the convection at the center really died off, and now it got, transported away from the storm center, and now it's having some extra flare-ups. This really reminds me of Sandy at this point in its later stages.
Oh yeah, it definitely does. It has the same sort of, hybrid structure where it kind of looks like a extratropical cyclone, but it still has a warm core, so therefore it is still a tropical cyclone.
National Hurricane Center pretty much acknowledging that fact. they said in their discussion earlier, for simplicity's sake, that they're keeping it a hurricane. So they might be suggesting that it isn't, but just for the simplicity and because we know what happened with the Sandy debacle and all that, all those warnings are still in place. We're also joined by Thomas Schwent. Good evening.
Good evening, Nathan. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. You're tracking Teddy as well, I assume.
Yes, I've been tracking Teddy throughout a lot of the day today. I think that the bases and my opinions on Teddy are probably pretty similar to everyone else's here. Its wind field is massive. It's really dangerous. There's going to be a lot of storm surge heading into Canada. Sydney and Halifax in particular are going to be getting the worst of this. It's going to be weakening from here on out, and it's probably not a hurricane anymore.
Well, our
according to
chief
Recon,
hurricane analyst, Devon, said in the last hour that he'd be surprised and is pretty much certain this storm will be making landfall with 85-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah.
Really? Because Recon is not supporting that it's that strong right now, at least.
Interesting.
I think the thing is that Recon, they're only getting up to 55 knot SFMR readings in the northeastern quadrant with flight level winds, around 80 knots. I think the thing is, though, is that a mix of, the further transition towards extratropical structure during the day has kind of either, and we'll find out soon with a higher degree of certainty, rotated some of those stronger winds towards the western side and the southwest side where some of that stronger convection is now. And also compared to this morning, they weren't sampling as far east away from the center as they were this morning. They're a bit close to the center now through, mix of the storm's evolving structure, meaning they're just changing how they're doing some of their flight patterns, of course. So, it is definitely possible that they haven't captured the strongest winds, but the pressure is still incredibly low for a storm of its current strength. Part of that's due to its latitude, part of it's, because of its transition right now. But
Sandy was a 940 millibar category 1.
Well, if
We
we're
have to
using
remember
Sandy as the only
extremely
comparison,
rare.
if we're using Sandy as the only comparison,
But this is further
compared to
north than
others-
Sandy as well. You'd expect a lower pressure.
Yeah, but in comparison for other hurricanes of similar strength at its latitude, other than, I guess using Sandy as a comparison because of their interactions with, troughs, it's obviously higher in pressure, but in comparison to other systems we see up here, it's definitely lower in pressure.
Regardless of intensity, it's still a dangerous storm nonetheless here and one to be taken seriously for those that are going to be impacted by it soon.
That's true. It also should be noted that if we take flight level winds, assuming that the flight is at 700 millibars, which yeah it is, those about 80 knot flight level winds that you're finding would support about 80 miles per hour at the surface. So it's a mix. I'd probably run with 70 miles an hour, mixing flight level data with SFMR. But again, very well could be a hurricane. The thing to acknowledge is, Nathan, you made a good point. Its pressure is not as low as Sandy's was. It's farther north. I don't think this will be a hurricane strength system when it does get to making landfall in Halifax or Sydney or wherever.
National Hurricane Center have always maintained that.
Yeah, I think that, although to be fair, it's not really going to be that much of a difference if it makes landfall as a 70-mile-an-hour storm or a 75-mile-an-hour storm. That's, generally more
true.
On the semantic side. Those warnings are in place for a
Plenty of
reason,
that in
people
this-
to be heeding them. And,
in this
there's a
world.
reason that there's been some mandatory self-evacuation orders issued for vulnerable areas in the Halifax area in particular as well. There are some places that have self-evacuation orders in place.
Do we have information on that? Specifics?
Yeah, so right now, low-lying and high-risk areas in Sambro, Peggy's Cove, and the Eastern Shore were told as of earlier today, this morning, to make immediate plans for voluntary self-evacuation. They have to, by tonight at 8 p.m., register with 311 to self-evacuate in order for the time for staff to plan adequately to help them find, place to go, general locations to be safe.
All right, we'll come back to to Teddy shortly. Elsewhere, we've got Beta, what's left of it there. It's got hardly any convection at all. But National Hurricane Center or Weather Prediction Center still think there's going to be another 6 inches of rain for parts of Texas or more.
I definitely think so, because it has been stalling over the area, and it hasn't really been moving that much.
Yeah, well, it's starting to accelerate slowly now. It's back to 5 miles an hour east-northeast, so there is still a possibility that it tries to barely come offshore near Galveston, although it's not particularly likely at this point in time. Regardless, though, and we talked a bit about this off air, they raised the additional rainfall forecast from days 1 to 3 around Houston to an additional 4 to 6. With some areas of 6 to 10. So they did re-up the expectations for rainfall on top of what's already happened there.
Structure looks very interesting on the satellite presentation, and its movement is tantalizingly close to emerging back over the water there.
It is, and that could be the beginnings. That could cause the beginnings of some new, more robust convection for a little bit if one of those boundaries over land gets over water. But as of now, I don't see the system moving back over water causing any sort of significant re-strengthening. The only thing that could happen, I think, is that convection could fire off again. And if we do get one convective burst, that could raise your rain totals by a fair bit. Because right now, the system does not have the strongest storms in the world, to say the least, with cloud tops barely touching -20s
Yes.
on the storm. If you can even say that. So
I think we're really fortunate with this storm in that, dry air and some wind shear was in place for this. Had that dry air and that wind shear been in place for this storm, certainly could have seen what the National Hurricane Center originally predicted with this hurricane. I think it was, not hurricane, this storm. I believe that they forecasted it to peak as an 80-mile-per-hour Category 1, if I'm not mistaken, at one point. But fortunately, that dry air and that wind shear took hold of it. And fortunately, we're talking about a tropical storm making landfall here, not a hurricane making landfall here, which is a really good thing. But still, like you guys have said earlier, still a serious storm nonetheless here in terms of its rainfall and coastal impacts that are still ongoing with this storm here. And also might as well want to put it out there that this is the first Greek alphabet storm to make landfall in the United States here since we started having Greek letters in the alphabet. And last time we used Greek letters in the alphabet was, of course, 2005, and then now, of course, in the 2020 season. So I just also wanted to bring that to your attention, guys.
Yeah, and I think what has helped people along the coast, with beta weakening, it stalled earlier than expected, I think, when it was quite a bit out, and it lost its way, really, didn't it?
It did. It was shear was higher than expected as well, and that was another good piece of news. I think that what really happened was there was one particular phase in Beta's life that we were starting to get real worried about it. It had a really robust eye wall on radar there for a few hours, and then it just collapsed, and nothing else came out of it.
Yeah.
Think goodness.
Just like that.
Yeah, it's pretty fortunate.
We could have looked at a much worse situation than this.
Yeah.
So, like Isaac said, this is a good situation. That doesn't mean to let your guard down. First of all, this storm's still very dangerous. It's still going to be producing lots of flooding. And secondly, unfortunately, we still have October to get through.
Oh,
Yeah.
let's
And,
not think about that yet.
And last mention in regards to beta too, as well, is that those bands are starting to try to fire up a bit more with general convection and rainfall strength. There is actually a flash flood warning over Houston right now in association with one of those stronger bands. So storm's definitely not over, and it's going to be lingering around the area probably at least the next 24 hours or so before it kicks out of Texas and moves into Louisiana tomorrow afternoon.
All right, just to give a mention as well elsewhere. Oh, if I can find it. There it is. That's Tropical Storm Dolphin in the Western Pacific. And that's looking pretty good as well, actually. Massive amounts of convection blowing up. Could be a brief typhoon. Suggestions that it could affect the Tokyo area in Japan. The JMA suggesting it will pass just to the south of there. Any quick comment on that?
Yeah, it looks like Tokyo is going to be getting tropical storm force winds at least out of this, and it looks like again, like you said, Nathan, it could be a brief typhoon, but it's going to be an upper end tropical storm impact near Tokyo. All areas around there should be watching this closely. Are going to be getting heavy rainfall, some decent storm surge. and you're definitely going to be getting some strong, at least 60-mile-per-hour sustained winds, I would expect, if you're in Tokyo. So,
Yeah,
Fortunately, though, at least it's going to be a question on whether or not a lot of that convection can come on shore, just because even though it definitely looks impressive right now, some of that convection is generally being ripped off towards the north and east, and since the system is expected to pass just east of Tokyo right now, a bit offshore, landfall's not out of the question yet, but not currently forecast. You could see it just miss on some of those heavier rainfall totals, but definitely something to keep an eye out for. If any of those bands really come on shore, or deeper convection blowups, then you're going to have a higher risk of flash flooding.
Back over with Teddy then, and we'll open up to questions at this point. Start your message with Force 13 all in text, and we'll field questions about any of the current 3 tropical cyclones that are active right now. I suppose there will be a few questions about Paulette as well, which regenerated in the Atlantic. Was it yesterday? I wasn't around.
yeah.
Well, there's also Lowell too.
And Lowell as well in
Well,
the Eastern
yeah.
Pacific, which I don't think anyone's going to really be interested in. But get your questions
Fair.
coming in on that one as well. There's Ethan, of course, but he's not around. But there it is on the right-hand side of the image. Lowell, that's a 45-mile-an-hour storm. I think it peaked at 50 earlier, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe
Yeah, it
so.
was 50. It was 50 at the 8 a.m. advisory.
So there's that. Anyway, back to the Atlantic. Let's see if we can get a closer look at the Gulf. There it is again, so you can see Beta and all of its influence, which really extends across the whole Gulf, really. It's a whole mess. Well, you look at the Atlantic, and actually, that's an enormous long tail there from Teddy. Regrettably, I can't pan this image up any, but you can use your imagination from Teddy's enormous influence. You've got that tail to the south, which is wrapping its way all the way through the Sargasso Sea to the Turks and Caicos Islands, the Bahamas, over Cuba, into the Gulf of Mexico, and linking up with Beta.
Yeah, I mean, models actually nailed that one down. The fact that we might see kind of a string of, convection or cloud cover extend from Teddy all the way down to Beta. The fact that it's actually occurred, though, is still kind of something stunning to see. And in the middle of the two is an area of interest with 10% odds of development in the next 5 days as
God
well.
damn it.
So, I mean, hey, what can you say? I mean, it's an absolutely crazy year. I think we have a flood of questions now at this point, though.
Oh, we do?
I want to go over some of those, yeah.
Yes, let's see. What place is Teddy in terms of size? I assume they mean...
Yeah. Wind diameter, I'd assume.
Yeah, ranking.
Yep. We
Yeah.
talked about it earlier. It's not in the top 5. The top 5 is around 810 miles in diameter. Teddy's closer, if you use the 5 p.m. graphic, to in between 750 and 780. So it is very likely within the top 20. We didn't have a full database, but it's not within the top 5, Although the fact that it is that large, that
Probably
at
top
40
10.
degrees north, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it cracks into that. The fact that at 40 some degrees north, it's cracking 15 degrees diameter for tropical storm force winds is very notable.
Will Teddy be dubbed as a superstorm? When this happened with Sandy in 2012, and I was there, I'm getting old now, it's 8 years ago, but during Sandy they called it a superstorm. I couldn't be doing with the media hype that went around it and calling it silly names like that. It's not it doesn't have any bearing scientifically or anything like that. I'm sure they'll come up with whatever the name they like. They also called Sandy Frankenstorm, didn't they?
Yeah,
Oh yeah, I
think,
remember that as well.
Well,
I remember that.
yeah, the only
Sandy
reason they called it
happened-
Frankenstorm was the time of year, and Superstorm was probably because it also started with S. So
Oh,
you'd be harder pressed to find that
it's
with
mad.
Teddy.
It's maddening.
terrifying storm, Teddy. Anybody?
Don't even try it.
Absolutely.
I wonder if there's
No.
one news agency out there that will go and call it a typhoon,
No.
just for the alliterative effect. They might.
I'd certainly hope not.
Oh, my.
No.
No.
More questions. Is Teddy bigger than Sandy? We've come to the conclusion that no at the moment.
No.
Terrifying Typhoon Teddy.
God damn it. Is how will Hurricane Teddy affect the town of Corner Brook? Major impacts, moderate impacts, with minor impacts.
Location for that is on the western coast, west central coast of Newfoundland.
Yeah.
So they're not directly under a tropical storm warning at this time, but they could see some tropical storm conditions because the center of the storm is expected to pass either over or just to the west of that location. So definitely make sure you're staying up to date with the latest from your local weather office. The storm should continue to weaken as it moves that far north. It really should have winds closer to 50 miles an hour maximum at that time, but that's still enough to be damaging if you're getting those conditions. So make sure you're staying up to date about it.
More questions here as well. What's the outlook for the next storms forming? Well, it's not clear cut that there will be storms immediately in the Atlantic. We know we've had a crazy season so far, but fingers crossed there might be a short break in the Atlantic, which means that we can get on with our lives for a few days. So we'll see what happens with that, but
And then,
equally there's a few little things that are starting to develop on models.
yeah, and it's looking like not this week, but next week in particular, the Caribbean could start to see some development of some sort. So that'll be interesting to see for sure. We'll be keeping a close eye on it.
And someone else with a question there about whether Teddy should be classified as a subtropical storm. Now, it's quite a complex situation right now. I don't think anyone can say it's fully tropical anymore. It is a hybrid of sorts. So what do we think?
It's really as you'd want to designate it. You know, you don't really transition from a tropical cyclone to a subtropical one, at least in terms of official designations. So it's not really the proper terminology, although it is acknowledged that it is a hybrid system with many non-tropical characteristics at this point in time.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with that. I mean, at this point, like you said, Nathan, I don't think that anyone's denying that this is not fully tropical anymore. There are lots of baroclinic processes that are taking place on this system right now, and a lot of its energy is definitely not coming from the ocean. You can actually see that because that convection is not very powerful, or at least very cool, towards the center. I mean, we're still getting some decent minus 40s into the minus 50s, which does indicate that it's still getting some of its energy from the surface. So there are definitely some tropical characteristics. There's definitely reason to keep it as a tropical cyclone for now.
It's way out of the Gulf Stream at this point. Sea surface temperatures down to looks like about 20 degrees Celsius, and by the time it reaches the coast of Nova Scotia, the sea surface temperatures about 15 or 16 degrees.
That's very true. But as long as the storm continues to have convection like it does over its center, I think there's an argument to be made that it's still a tropical cyclone of some sort.
Yeah, it's probably going to continue to lose that tonight. It is expected that this could potentially be the last burst because it is over, of course, not the Gulf Stream anymore. Colder sea surface temperatures continue to drop off below, conditions for tropical cyclone, sustainability. But that actually kind of goes to the point that despite the rainfall totals not being the largest in forecasts, in general, Nova Scotia and parts of Newfoundland are looking for up to 3 to 4 inches localized, a bit higher, based on computer models and stuff right now. The wind radius is so big that you're going to see significant wind speeds sustained even when there is no thunderstorm or rainfall activity ongoing. So this is one of the situations where you should be looking potentially more for storm surge and actual wind damage than direct flash flooding, mostly because as it continues to turn post-tropical even more, that deep convection near the center, that if that were coming on shore, would be more of an immediate concern for flash flooding, will degrade, at least in comparison to where it is right now, to the point where your largest individual concern will actually be a mix of storm surge if you're in low-lying and coastal areas, and just the actual long-term damage that could be caused by sustained tropical storm force winds lasting for 12 to 24 plus hours if you're in a bad spot with it right now.
Now on the wide shot, you can just about see Paulette that regenerated southeast of the Azores, small system at this point. And there it is as we fade into nightfall there. Doesn't look too good up there, it's hard to see. But there's a question about it, how long can Paulette live for again? And can its low-level circulation survive and regenerate again?
Well, the forecast right now is that it's going to turn into a post-tropical system again within the next 12 hours or so. It's really been losing most of its deep convection as dry air and shear really just kill away at it after it redeveloped. They are expecting that the low-level center will survive for about 4 days before dissipating still, but that this is probably the end of the road for Paulette this time around. We're not going to see any new resurrections again, although I think anyone else here would probably agree that it is pretty amazing to see a P-name storm active the same time as a Greek letter name storm.
I mean, that's how many names apart are there? 1,
7.
2, 3, 4, 5, 7
7.
names. So that's like the same thing as having like the A name storm active during the H name storm, you know?
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
it's definitely interesting to see its progress over the I think weeks now that it's been active pretty much. I remember I think it was fighting off at one point. I think it was fighting off 40 knots of wind shear for about 2 days or so at one point earlier in its life before it hit Bermuda dead on pretty much.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
Have fun animating that, Nathan.
Thanks.
If you want a reminder for when this thing was first designated, it was Sunday evening Atlantic time on September 6th.
Wow.
So
when
it's been
formed.
quite a while. It's been
Right.
more than half a month.
Took a trip through the whole open Atlantic for the most part.
And Bermuda.
Yeah,
All right.
unfortunately so.
Now another question here, what kind of impacts could Truro have from Teddy? That's in on the northern coast of Nova Scotia. It's sort of where I can't describe it, but it's in the bands of the storm right now. So I think it will probably just about get the edge of the storm's core. I would expect high tropical storm force winds, maybe hurricane force gusts at worst. Rainfall amounts over the whole of Nova Scotia, we're looking at about, 100 plus millimeters of rain. Something like 5 inches as a maximum.
Yeah, the general should be around 100 millimeters or around 3 inches for most of the island where the center passes. You know, a little bit less on the far western and far eastern parts of Nova Scotia. And then again, isolated could go up a little bit higher towards 5 inches.
Will Teddy be one of the largest storms ever in terms of gale force? That's the metric we have been going by, isn't it?
Yeah, it has been, and it's very likely within the top 10 at its zenith today, at around in between 750 and 780 miles in diameter. It's not quite in the top 5, but it's quite close. I'm sure everyone will be pouring over reanalysis of it after the storm's gone to determine how exactly large that wind field was at peak and where it fits exactly on the rankings.
Oh, good question there as well about the CDPS scale for Teddy. We're reliably informed that it's a CDPS stage 7 on that 10-tiered scale. So certainly because of the storm's size, its wind field, it's got massive destruction potential. 7 is quite high.
It's very high on the scale. I believe that's when you're starting to get into really catastrophic impacts, devastating impacts from these storms. I mean, this is on the upper end, and I mean, this is the point of the CDPS scale.
I think it's about the same as what Dorian was in this area, wasn't it?
Pretty
I
similar.
don't actually know.
I think Dorian was actually a bit lower because
I think
its
it
size was
was.
smaller, but its intensity was a bit higher.
Hmm.
You know, regardless though, of course it's a major threat for Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. That's the reason that there are those tropical cyclone warnings in place, and why there's been mandatory evacuation orders issued for certain low-lying and high-risk areas near Halifax right now, or Halifax, I'm sorry, butchering pronunciations today.
It's not hard.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit tired. It's been a long past couple weeks tracking everything.
Yes,
man.
there was a question about Halifax as well. Around what time will the worst part of the storm be there? And I'm just trying to get an indication for you when that will be. We're probably looking at early morning, early hours of the morning, maybe between between midnight and 7, 8 in the morning will be the worst time for Halifax.
I think that's a fair assessment. I'd like to note. Oh, go on.
Just more questions. Possible effects in northeastern New Brunswick. Could tropical storm force winds be more likely there, considering the very large wind field?
Certainly possible. There isn't specific tropical storm warnings. Actually, there might be. There's a rainfall warning in place for Moncton and southeast New Brunswick right now. So, the Canada's Weather Service is putting out, these warnings. Their website's a good source for that. That's on the very northeastern tip. I'm sure there's more local watches, warnings, and advisors in place with it because the wind field is massive. So right now, even if that passes, over the eastern part of Nova Scotia, the actual center of the storm, it is probable that at least tropical storm gust will be reaching out into New Brunswick, as the storm, completes
No
post-tropical
storm
transition.
warnings there, but New Brunswick, especially along the southern coast, and probably even more so on the eastern coast, facing Prince Edward Island, will get the strongest winds as the storm passes through, although the maximums you're probably looking at 40 to 50 miles per hour, which is 65 to 80 kilometers per hour.
Yep.
And those are in generally coastal and exposed locations.
Yep. And someone asking really quick, just to go over before some more questions, where the expected landfall is right now. It looks like, based on the latest cone, that they wanted a bit east of Halifax right now. In between Halifax and Port Dufferin right now. It looks to be about what they're saying on the 5 p.m. cone. But of course, it is notable that the center can pass anywhere within that. And the actual center doesn't matter really too much at that point, because it is expected as the post-tropical transition completes itself, the center will lose most of that deep convection. And just anywhere where the strongest wind radius is, or wherever the strongest winds are occurring, along with some rainfalls, where you're going to be looking at for the largest threat areas.
Yeah, well, it's going to start paralleling the coast a little bit more when it gets closer, so it could easily make landfall further east. I've got it down as probably somewhere near Port Bickerton.
Take a look at that. Yeah, that'd be a bit further east, especially if it tries to curve off to the east too, near landfall and parallel, like some of the models are indicating.
But regardless, put it this way, the strongest winds will start to be felt onshore in some part of Nova Scotia, southern facing coast, by about 1 a.m., 2 a.m. maybe.
Yeah, we're quickly approaching that time where the strongest part of the storm will be hitting land. And even before this, we're probably seeing some pretty, at least some rapidly deteriorating conditions in places such as Halifax, which is well within tropical storm force winds now, and will likely be continuing to receive tropical storm force winds for, I'd argue, even the next day. So it's going to be a rough ride for them. I think that the worst part about this storm in particular is also going to be, and I think Strat touched on this earlier, there are some parts where on visible satellite where you had Recon finding up to 60, 65, maybe even 70 mile an hour winds flight level, which can convert down to 50 to 60 on the surface. There was pure sun. There was no clouds whatsoever. So you're going to be experiencing strong winds regardless of whether there's convection associated with it or not. So these impacts, you can't really predict when they're going to arrive, just based on the typical way that you could with a hurricane. So
Yeah, I mean, and that also goes to the other end, to when the storm's actually, north, or typically what you assume past as well, because as the storm, really goes fully post-tropical as it passes Nova Scotia, it really should lose most of its rainfall and any convective activity on the southern half. The dry air protrusion, as you can see on satellite imagery, is already massive and causing the southeastern side to be devoid. But really, the whole southern half will be more empty at that point. However, that doesn't actually mean that the winds will be gone either. So you could have a significant time period where there's not a lot of rainfall. When the storms, let's say, if we're using Halifax as a location point, for example, when Halifax is, say, 100 miles southwest of where the center is, a little over a day from now, but you'll still have, the wind radius being large enough that they'll still be getting tropical storm force winds even with no rainfall. I can speak from personal experience to some regard of that. During Sandy in southern New England, we had, most of the storm with almost no rainfall, but it is still one of the most damaging storms on record for our area just because the wind was so strong for such a prolonged time period.
Looking at some current observations, actually, Baccaro Point, which is pretty much the southern tip of Nova Scotia there, currently having a pressure of 992 and wind speeds sustained 43 kilometers per hour, which is about 30 miles per hour, and gusting to 64, which is 40 miles per hour.
And where did you say this was?
That's pretty much the southern tip of Nova Scotia there.
Really? It's interesting information, especially considering the NHC's wind field graphic shows them well within those tropical storm force winds.
What you have to consider with the National Hurricane Center's wind graphic is that it's not to say that tropical storm force winds are guaranteed in that blob of orange, it's that it's possible there. That they expect it to happen somewhere within that big oval thing.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the kind of downsides of making those kind of graphics is that, just because it looks like that indicating that tropical storm force winds can occur doesn't mean that they are occurring at every point inside that circle or oval shape, whatever you really want to call it.
But it does mean that you
Same
have
with
to
hurricane
prepare
force.
as if it is happening everywhere within that zone, if you're in that zone.
Yep, that's exactly true. And, especially as the storm continues to plow northward, areas that may look like they're partially under those right now but aren't receiving sustained for significant time periods will have those become more sustained and stronger in maximum strength as well. And, that doesn't even take into consideration the other factors that will continue to deteriorate, such as rainfall and storm surge.
This is interesting, actually. Areas on the western side of Nova Scotia are getting the highest winds at the moment. Briar Island is currently getting sustained winds of 64 kilometers per hour, that's 40 miles per hour, gusting to 82, which is 51 miles per hour.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't really particularly surprise me that the western side would be seeing some stronger conditions in terms of winds than the north. We've seen, several times with storms undergoing post-tropical transitions as they interact with troughs along, the near the eastern seaboard of the United States and Canada, transition their strongest winds from the eastern side and northeastern side towards the, south, or not southwest, but just generally northwest or southwest quadrants instead. So that fact doesn't particularly surprise me, along with most of the deep convection being associated on that half of the system as well.
Slightly
Looks
gusty
like
up towards Sydney as well, with borderline, with about 30 to 35 mile an hour winds there.
I'd just like to point out that a reconnaissance plane made a new pass in the center. For some reason, I guess the plane stopped transmitting pressure readings for now, so we only have wind readings. But so far, the highest wind reading I've seen so far, SFMR-wise at least, in the northwestern quadrant has been about 50 knots in 3 different readings that were non-suspect on the northwest quadrant.
Wow.
Yeah, with 60-knot flight level winds, which would translate to about 55 knots at the surface.
Yeah.
So, 50 to 55 knots.
So you're really suggesting that this is no longer of hurricane strength?
Well, I think there's the point that makes it a bit harder to say that with full certainty, though, is that they've only really went in terms of, degrees north away from the center about 1.5 degrees, and they only really went, about 1.5 degrees east of the center. And, you're talking about a wind field that has those sustained winds of hurricane force occurring, significantly further away, or at least on the western side than where they went, and especially tropical storm force winds. So it is possible that they aren't actually capturing the strongest winds, because as the storm continues to complete its post-tropical transition, those strongest winds continue to become further and further displaced from the actual center of the storm.
What happens when a storm does become post-tropical, though, is that the winds really spread out. You don't get winds that are as strong, but they are covering a much wider area, and we saw that kind of thing with Sandy, which caused the same amount of damage as a Category 4 could cause.
Absolutely, and I mean, again, regardless of the actual intensity of the storm, still it's going to have strong enough winds over a widespread enough basis that it's still going to be very dangerous. And again, that that new flight data that we just saw come in, that is from the northwestern side. The winds were far stronger just a little bit ago on the northeastern side, where we were seeing SFMRs up to around 57, 58 knots, with still flight level winds supporting a hurricane. So I'm not going to rule out this still being a Category 1 hurricane, but I'll be more interested to see what this recon plane finds as it does fly into the southeastern side here, where they found hurricane force winds at flight level for quite a while. If they no longer find hurricane force winds at flight level there, then we can probably say safely that this is no longer a hurricane, but we'll just have to see.
So there we are. Keep your messages coming in for the next 20 minutes whilst we are continuing our discussion. Start your message with Force 13 all in text, and it will light up for us in the chat section. Quite a few questions that came in earlier in comments. A few suggesting similarities or wanting us to talk about how similar it is or how different it is to Hurricane Juan, which struck Nova Scotia in 2003 as a Category 2, I think it was.
Yep, Category 2.
Anything else?
The thing about Juan is that was a Category 2 when it peaked out. This storm, when it was peaking out, was a Category 4.
Sure.
Juan also did peak much closer to Canada, and I think did make landfall as a Cat 2 in Canada, which this system will not be doing.
Yeah, and I mean, on top of that as well, Juan was still much more tropical in structure when it made landfall in Nova Scotia than this thing will be by a wide margin, So, I mean, they're both, of course, powerful systems making landfall in Nova Scotia, but I think a lot of the similarities kind of cut off there, to be honest.
A question about whether Maine will get any rain, and that's a valid question actually, because the very eastern part of Maine, the eastern 2 or 3 counties probably, will get significant rainfall amounts. The easternmost part could get 2 inches.
Yeah, for
I
Maine in
say-
particular, that's a lot of rain, I think.
They're
they
receiving
do-
rain right now.
Yeah, I mean, they have some coastal flood warnings and coastal flood advisories in place for most of coastal Maine right now.
Oh,
So they're acknowledging that, along with gale warnings for the coastal areas and just
there you
offshore
go.
as well.
Isaac's showing the radar there, so you can see how it's looking, really pushing through, and it's a shame that radar doesn't go as far out as Nova Scotia. Or does it?
There are some Nova Scotia radars, but they don't have as wide of a range.
I know, I've seen them.
this one does.
The reason why we've not shown them is that it's not really depicting much on the radars over there.
There is actually
Maybe
a lot of
there
rain.
literally is nothing there right now. There's a bit of a dry slot for Nova Scotia, but we've obviously seen, you can see there that rain's pushing northwest, so that obviously visited not long ago.
There is I was looking at the radar from Nova Scotia earlier, and there is actually Sydney, Nova Scotia is getting a pretty decent rain band right
Yes.
now. However, I should say that parts of southern Nova Scotia, like Bedford, Nova Scotia, aren't really getting much of any rain at this point in time, at least compared to how it is in Sydney right now.
That's all because of that band, isn't it?
Most likely, yeah.
So you'll see that rain band will probably reach Bangor in about, what would you say, an hour or two?
Don't know how exactly fast it's moving, but I would, lean to your estimate there.
All right. Let's go back to the imagery. This is the latest infrared now, because visible imagery has gone away as the sun has. And of course, it's one of the first days of the fall season. When you talk about the astronomy of it all, the nights are longer than the days now. But the western side of Teddy, still blowing up some convection there, which is interesting, although it appears to me as though it might not be over the center.
No, it looks a little bit displaced to the west of the center. The actual center of circulation, if you just use conventional infrared satellite, looks to be barely east of that, almost like it's trying to wrap something around it, but not really doing so very successfully. If you want a comparison for like time frame, it's almost like Sandy on the morning of October 29th when it made landfall, when it redeveloped that burst of convection and developed a visible eye with full convection around it on satellite imagery before it really turned fully post-tropical. Although this certainly doesn't look quite as impressive as that, of course. Unfortunately, this is occurring further offshore as a weaker system that's already beginning its weakening trend again as well.
We've got some more questions about beta as well, or one at least. Let's see if we can get back to that imagery. There it is, as it's moving through. For the western part of Houston, expectations there, rainfall amounts, looking at maybe 4 inches.
Yeah, although I think it is key to note that that's going to be on top of what's already fallen in the area.
Sure.
So that's additional rainfall on top of, the amounts that have already come down. I don't know the exact totals in front of me. Some of it's going to be location dependent too, because if you're, on the far eastern side of Houston and the southeastern suburbs, you're going to get more rainfall than if you're on the northwestern side in the northwestern suburbs by a pretty good margin right now as the storm moves to the east-northeast.
I want to say that I was looking at a tweet earlier by the National Weather Service in Houston, and I want to say, I think it was like 3 hours ago when I looked at that tweet, radar estimated rain totals up to, I think, 8 inches northeast of Houston, Texas, I want to say, if I remember correctly.
Looking west,
Yep.
There about 3 to 4 inches further. East Houston could be over 6 inches more. And then as you move on towards the east, there's some other areas where you could see 6 inches or higher towards Beaumont. And then into Louisiana, significant parts there that could get over 4 inches of rain. I assume that they don't want any more rain after recent events. Same goes for Mississippi, Alabama, northern reaches of those states. Over 2 inches, parts of Mississippi over 4.
Yeah, it's been interesting over here. I'm not in Houston, of course. I'm in Corpus Christi, but it's been interesting because yesterday, around the same time yesterday, it was overcast, rainy, and kind of dreary day. And now sun's pretty much all out right now, and it's just partly cloudy, nice regular summer day right now today.
We've not really thought, there's a question there about live webcams. We've not really thought about that for Nova Scotia. I'd imagine if there was, that we wouldn't be able to see much on it at any rate, because it's nightfall.
Yeah, I did try to look for some webcams, but all of them were ones that updated every like 30 minutes or so, so I kind of scrapped that idea.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But there are webcams there.
It's after dark. I doubt you'll see much anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think you had a loop on Paulette there, a close loop, because I don't have a close loop, so
yes,
it'd be nice
there
to
it
see
is.
that from your perspective. Here's Paulette right now. Oh dear, not looking so good. Passing the Azores there, the easternmost islands, and continuing on east. Well, it's been fighting for a long time. National Hurricane Center suggests it will turn post-tropical later tonight, and then it will swivel round to the south and west again, and it might be traceable in a good 3, 4, 5 days. And if it is still traceable by then, it will be further west near the Azores, and then it will turn around again. It will probably get swallowed up by something or other. Maybe even by Teddy. You never know.
Yeah. There's the cone right there, and you get to see they forecast it to dissipate really soon here and do that loop looks like around Thursday morning. do a loop back to the southwest.
All right. Let's see what other comments we've got here. Do you think... That's an interesting comment. I think that comment is referring to how the effects would compare to Hurricane Noel, or Noel.
Hmm.
I'm not too familiar with that storm, so I wouldn't be really qualified to.
I know
to
it
give a
caused very bad
comparison.
erosion. All right. There's another comment there as well by Al, thanking us for the coverage. Well, we are here every time there's a storm on the horizon, so we've been pretty busy this year, let's say. How does Teddy compare to Dorian in Nova Scotia then? That's probably one of the burning questions, because Dorian's the closest example to hand. Any comment on input on that?
Well, Dorian was, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, you guys could correct me because I'm not really, up to date with my hurricane knowledge sometimes. But I believe it was a Category 2 at landfall as a post-tropical storm. I want to say this is forecast to be a tropical storm force storm, going off the National Hurricane Center code for it.
Whoops.
But still, regardless, dangerous system.
Indeed. Just ignore that noise. That was wonderful. I'm just trying to look this up. Yes, there is a place called Knoll in Nova Scotia, so we ought to talk about that. That's not too far from Truro, because when we first think of Knoll, I think of the hurricane in 2007, which was a Category 1 or 2, caused a lot of erosion. So Knoll west of Truro, somewhere near Windsor, I believe, you could expect getting up towards tropical storm force winds there, I should imagine. And rainfall amounts maybe 3 inches at the most. Yeah, maybe 3, pushing a little bit higher than 3 at worst. And that would be 75 millimeters or so. Let's see what other questions we have right now. General questions about how we do animations and such. Well, that would take a whole 3-hour lecture probably. How does Teddy compare to Arthur of 2014 in Nova Scotia?
Ooh. This is definitely going to be worse than Arthur.
Yeah.
I think that's for sure. And Arthur peaked as a Cat 2, I want to say, near
Correct.
North Carolina. And
Yeah,
then it moved up north, and I don't even believe it made a hurricane impact to Nova Scotia.
I don't know.
I don't remember. I just remember it peaked as a Cat 2.
The only reason that I remember anything from it is because it was one of the first tropical cyclones I ever tracked.
Hmm.
And,
I believe it hit on the 4th of July as well, too.
Yeah, it did.
Well, let's get down to the key facts then at this point, because comparisons don't get us very far. From the National Hurricane Center's key messages, Teddy is expected to transition to a powerful post-tropical cyclone as it moves near or over portions of Atlantic Canada late today through Thursday. The most significant hazard expected from Teddy is large destructive waves forecast along the southern coast of Nova Scotia through Wednesday. Very large swells produced by the storm are expected to affect portions of Bermuda still, the Leeward Islands, the Greater Antilles, the Bahamas, east coast of the US. Tell you if this hasn't been updated in a while, and Atlantic Canada during the next few days. These swells are expected to cause life-threatening surf and rip current conditions. Tropical storm watches and warnings in effect for portions of Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island and the Magdalen Islands, and heavy rainfall across Atlantic Canada are expected through Thursday. Because of the size of the storm, it will be Thursday by the time it clears through. And just to remind you, it's an extremely large hurricane. Hurricane force winds extend outwards up to 125 miles, which is 205 kilometers from the center, and tropical storm force winds extend outward up to 540 miles, 870 kilometers from the center, and a significant wave height from a weather buoy 44150, 90 nautical miles north of the center, reported a significant wave height of 42 feet.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't surprise me. The storm's had a lot of time to churn up water and build those heights for several days now, not just at its peak as a Category 4, but as expanded in size too. So fortunately, you're not having 40 feet waves as, 40-foot storm surge, but it goes to show the strength of the system and the storm surge that can actually bring on shore as well. And
Indeed,
Isaac's got a Recon update too?
Okay.
Yeah, the Recon just updated. Unfortunately, they haven't turned on the pressure reading thing, I guess, for some reason. But we got wind readings still, as from Mars, and they took a pass down to the southwestern quadrant again.
Okay.
Well, not again, but the southwestern quadrant here, and they found 3 peak SFMRs of 61 knots, two non-suspect and 1 suspect reading of 61 knot SFMRs in the southwestern quadrant pass.
So what do we interpret from that then?
That well, actually, I don't remember what the last reconnaissance plane pass found in that part of the storm, but I want to say this is a little bit weaker than the last hurricane plane that went into Teddy. So maybe on the weakening trend here,
Wow.
still hopefully.
Yeah. What are the peak flight level winds on that as well? Because this is actually the first southwestern quadrant pass for it that they had on recorded data. The last flight level pass several hours ago was showing around 85 to 90 knot flight levels in that quadrant.
Flight level is a little over 80 knots on this newest pass.
Yeah, so it looks to be similar to a few hours ago, to this morning actually. That was stopped transponding around 2 p.m. Eastern time, but it did that pass sooner, but a bit weaker than earlier on that side.
Mm-hmm.
So, in closing here, just discuss with us what to expect over in Halifax, which is one of the largest settlements in Nova Scotia, the largest, I believe, that will be getting one of the closest impacts from the storm. What to expect there overnight?
Well, you're looking at the potential for hurricane gusts, almost certainly strong tropical storm force sustained winds. If it does hang on a little bit better, or tries to get a burst up, you could see, minimal hurricane strength sustained, but that generally isn't forecast and isn't very likely. Overall, strong tropical storm force sustained winds for a significant time period, even after the center passes. Rainfall, up to around 3 inches, but could get locally higher. And the storm surge will also be a very significant concern. That's why there are some evacuation orders in place for low-lying areas around Halifax right now.
Yeah, definitely potential for a storm surge as well. That put it very nicely, actually, Strat. And a few people asking about when we will be doing more updates. I don't know whether we'll have a video update out later tonight or not. But in any event, we will be here for the landfall we anticipate. And that will be early tomorrow morning. So when it looks like it's about to strike land, we'll go live for another hour or so and discuss the latest information whenever that might be. Does that sound good with everyone?
Yep.
And we also got our automated feed too.
We do,
right
yes.
now it's up. So that's flipping between Teddy, Beta, and a couple wide shots for the basin. But it is giving automatically updated satellite imagery and manually updated data every few hours when possible, giving the latest information on both the active systems, Paulette and Beta, or not Paulette, boy, I'm sorry, Teddy and Beta that are impacting land right now. And if you want to see that, the link to that's going to be posted in the chat a few times right now.
And that's on our usual live link.
Yeah, that'll default back to being our usual live link a few minutes after the stream goes off the air.
You can also join us on our Discord server, discord.gg/force13, and our social platforms where you can get in touch with us. I know that there were at least 2 emails that came in during that event. I can't type emails whilst on air, unfortunately. I'll get to them as soon as possible. You can send emails if you like. And you can send messages to our social media platforms on Facebook and Twitter. Search Force13 all in text. That's all from us for tonight. The storm's drawing in. Enormous Hurricane Teddy Beta still producing rainfall. Tropical storm Dolphin headed towards eastern Japan. And Paulette still surviving, only for a little bit longer. That's how the tropics look today, this September 22nd, about to enter the 23rd in a few hours. That's all from us, and we'll be here for the landfall in the morning. Good night.